Captain Jake Morrison was on his third cup of coffee that morning, sitting in the Communications Center of North American Defense Command. It was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday, the kind of day where the biggest excitement would be a software update or maybe a satellite malfunction. Jake had been doing this job for 12 years, and he'd learned to appreciate the boring days. Then the message came through. At first, it looked like static. The computers were struggling, making that grinding noise they made when they were working overtime. The universal translator was going crazy, cycling through languages that didn't exist in any human database. Jake was about to call the tech guys when Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez looked up from her station. "Sir, you really need to see this," she said, her voice carrying that tone that made Jake's old combat instincts sit up and pay attention. Amy had been with the unit for 3 years, and she wasn't the type to get excited over nothing. The hologram projector hummed to life in the center of the room, and suddenly Jake was staring at something that made his coffee taste like ash in his mouth. The creatures on the screen looked like someone had taken every nightmare humanity had ever had and decided to make them real. There were at least 6 different species, all speaking at the same time, their voices mixing together in a way that made the air feel thick and heavy. To all spacefaring civilizations, the message began, the translation appearing in floating text beside the horrifying images. An ancient threat has awakened from the dark spaces between galaxies. The Devourers have returned. They consume entire worlds, leaving nothing but barren rock and silence. Any species capable of military response should consider joining our defense efforts. Jake felt his blood run cold as the footage rolled. Planets that had once been green and blue, covered in cities and forests and oceans, now looked like gray, lifeless marbles floating in space. Massive bioships, things that looked more grown than built, tearing through space fleets like they were made of paper. These weren't just ships, they were living things, pulsing and writhing as they moved through space. The aliens weren't just asking for help, they were begging. "Rodriguez, get me a line to the Pentagon," Jake said, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his stomach. "And patch this through to every Allied command center on the planet." As Amy worked her magic with the communications array, Jake watched more of the footage. The bioships moved like predators, hunting down fleeing civilian vessels. They didn't just destroy things, they absorbed them, breaking down matter at the molecular level and adding it to their own mass. It was methodical, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. Around the galaxy, Jake knew other civilizations were probably doing what civilized species always did when faced with crisis. They were forming committees, running computer simulations, calculating risks and benefits, holding emergency sessions of their parliaments or councils or whatever they called their governments. The smart species would send a few ships, maybe some supplies. The really cautious ones would offer moral support and humanitarian aid. They'd do their part, but they'd be careful not to risk too much. But humans were different. Jake had seen it before, back during the border wars. When someone threatened something humans care about, they didn't form committees. They didn't run cost-benefit analyses. They got mad, and when humans got mad, things got broken. Within 2 hours, every screen in the command center was showing the same thing: mobilization orders. The president had called an emergency session of Congress, and for maybe the first time in decades, Republicans and Democrats agreed on something immediately. The vote wasn't even close. Admiral Helen Burke was on a secure line from Norfolk Naval Base, her voice cutting through the static with the kind of authority that made 4-star generals sit up straight. "Morrison, I need everything you've got on these Devourers," she said without preamble. "Analysis, projections, weak points if you can find them. We're moving to full war footing. Ma'am, how many ships are we talking about?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "All of them, Captain. Every ship we can get space-worthy. Every pilot we can put in a cockpit. Every Marine who can hold a rifle. These things made a mistake when they decided to threaten inhabited worlds." Jake could hear the activity in the background of Burke's call, the sound of naval base transforming into something humanity hadn't seen since the last World War. Klaxons were blaring. Boots were pounding on metal decking, and somewhere in the distance, the deep rumble of ship engines coming online. They asked for volunteers, Burke continued, and Jake could hear the grim smile in her voice. They're about to learn what happens when you mess with the neighborhood while humans are around. As Jake watched the mobilization orders flood in from every military installation on Earth, he realized something that probably wouldn't occur to the aliens for several more hours. They'd sent out a distress call asking for help from anyone who could fight. What they were about to get was 8 billion humans who had just learned that something out there was eating planets. And humans took that sort of thing very personally indeed. The boring Tuesday was officially over. The meeting point in deep space was supposed to look impressive. Commander Zektar of the Altarian Republic had carefully arranged his 12 ships in a perfect defensive formation. Each vessel was a masterpiece of their civilization. Sleek research ships with the most advanced sensors money could buy, armed with non-lethal defensive systems, and powered by clean fusion reactors that their engineers were particularly proud of. The Vorthat Confederation had done them one better, bringing 30 light cruisers that sparkled like jewels against the starfield. Captain Veltar had made sure every hull was polished to a mirror shine, displaying the diplomatic emblems that marked them as a peaceful species who preferred negotiation to violence. Their ships were beautiful, elegant, and designed more for exploration than warfare. Then the humans arrived. Zektar was reviewing tactical displays when a sensor officer made a choking sound that roughly translated to, "Oh no, what have we done?" The commander looked up from his reports to see something that made his 4 hearts skip several beats. The human fleet was still jumping in, ship after ship materializing out of hyperspace like some kind of mechanical plague. These weren't the careful, measured deployments that civilized species used. This was an avalanche of metal and weapons that kept coming until it blocked out the stars themselves. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered in their native language, "my sensors are counting over 600 vessels, and they're still arriving." "This has to be some kind of mistake," Captain Veltar said over the communication link, his voice carrying that particular tone that species throughout the galaxy use when they realized they might have made a terrible error in judgment. Surely they didn't bring their entire fleet. But they had. Massive dreadnoughts that looked like flying cities bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Sleek destroyers that moved through space like hunting animals. Their hulls covered in weapon systems that the Allied computers couldn't even identify. Aircraft carriers the size of small moons, launching fighter squadrons in numbers that made Zektar's head spin. The human ships didn't arrange themselves in neat formations like civilized militaries. They spread out like a pack of predators, each vessel positioned to provide maximum firepower coverage while maintaining the ability to move and strike at a moment's notice. It was beautiful, terrifying, and completely unlike anything the Allied species had ever seen. When Admiral Hellenberg's flagship, a monster of a ship called the USS Determination, requested a strategy meeting, the alien commanders gathered in what they hoped would be a civilized discussion about defensive tactics and careful planning. What they got instead was their first introduction to human military thinking. "Gentlemen," Admiral Burke said as she reviewed the alien defense plans on the holographic display, "your strategies are solid. Good defensive positioning, smart use of terrain, excellent coordination between your fleets." The alien commanders relaxed slightly. Perhaps these humans could be reasoned with after all. But Burke continued, and that single word made every non-human in the room tense up again. Defense isn't going to win this war. Defensive strategies work when you're dealing with a rational enemy who has something to lose. These devourers don't negotiate, they don't retreat, and they don't stop until everything is dead. She gestured to the tactical display, highlighting the bio-ship movement patterns from their intelligence reports. "While you're sitting here protecting your worlds, these things are out there making more themselves. Every planet they consume makes them stronger. Every day we wait gives them time to spread." Commander Zektar shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The Altarians had built their entire civilization on the concept of calculated risk. They analyzed every situation from 16 different angles before making any decision, and they'd never encounter a problem that couldn't be solved with enough careful thought and planning. "Admiral," he said carefully, "these creatures have been dormant for millions of years. They represent a threat unlike anything our species have faced. Perhaps we should focus on containment strategies rather than direct confrontation. We could establish defensive perimeters, evacuate threatened systems, and... Containment?" Burke's laugh was sharp enough to cut through the recycled air of the conference room. "Commander, you sent out a distress call because worlds are being eaten. Your people are dying. My people haven't even been attacked yet, but we didn't come here to build walls and hope the monsters get bored." The alien commanders exchanged glances that needed no translation. The Vorthak favored diplomatic solutions. They'd ended 3 separate wars through negotiation and compromise. The Alterians believed in scientific approaches to every problem. The humans were talking about hunting cosmic horrors across the galaxy like it was just another day at the office. "We need to find where these things come from," Burke continued, pulling up star charts that showed the deepest, most dangerous regions of known space. "We need to track them back to their source, and we need to make sure they never threaten anyone again. Not contain them, eliminate them." Captain Veltar's translator was having trouble with some of the human military terms, but the intent was crystal clear. "Admiral, surely you don't mean to suggest a direct assault on their home territory. The risks would be astronomical." "Captain," Burke replied with a kind of smile that made smart people check their insurance policies, "my species learned a long time ago that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let a threat think you're afraid of it. These devourers picked the wrong galaxy to mess with." That's when every proximity alarm in the Allied fleet started screaming at once. The bioships had found them, and they were coming in fast. As the alien commanders scrambled to implement their careful defensive strategies, Admiral Burke was already giving orders that sounded less like military tactics and more like controlled chaos. The real war was about to begin, and the aliens were about to learn why humans had a reputation for being the galaxy's most dangerous neighbors. The bioships materialized out of hyperspace, like something crawling out of the galaxy's worst nightmare. These weren't machines built in shipyards. They were living things, massive organic horrors the size of space stations that pulse and writhe as they move through the vacuum. Their hulls rippled with bioluminescent veins that glowed sickly green against the starfield, and watching them move was like seeing cancer given the ability to fly. Commander Zektar's tactical officer was the first to spot them on sensors. "Sir, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace." "Reading? Oh no. Sir, these readings can't be correct." But they were correct. 15 bioships, each one bigger than the largest human dreadnought, moving with a predatory grace that made every instinct scream run. They weren't heading for the Allied fleet. They were heading straight for the nearest inhabited system, where 3 billion Altrian civilians were going about their daily lives with no idea that death was coming to visit. The first attack wasn't weapons fire or energy beams or anything the Allied fleet could have prepared for. It was sound, or rather, something that bypassed the ears entirely and went straight into the brain. The psychic whale hit the Allied fleet like a tidal wave of pure terror. It was a sound of civilizations dying, of worlds being stripped bare, of every scream that had ever been screamed in the dark between the stars. Most species had evolved some basic psychic sensitivity, and that sensitivity was now being used against them like a weapon. On the Altrian flagship, crew members collapsed at their stations as the mental assault overwhelmed their minds. Some were crying, others were laughing hysterically, and more than a few were curled up in corners babbling about things that couldn't possibly exist. The ship's medical bay filled up in minutes with officers who'd simply shut down rather than process what they were experiencing. The Vorthak fleet wasn't doing much better. Captain Veltar watched in horror as his own bridge crew began abandoning their posts. His communications officer was trying to crawl under his console, muttering prayers in 6 different languages. His weapons officer had locked himself in the bathroom and was refusing to come out. "All ships, prepare to retreat," Veltar ordered, his own voice shaking as the psychic pressure made his head feel like it was splitting open. "Fall back to the secondary rally point." That's when Admiral Burke's voice cut through the mental noise like a knife through fog. "All units, this is Admiral Burke," she said, her tone carrying the kind of calm authority that made people stop panicking and start thinking. "I know you're hearing some unpleasant noises right now. Ignore the horror movie soundtrack and light these things up." The human fleet moved forward into the psychic storm like it was nothing more than bad weather. Their ships maintained perfect formation, their weapon systems came online with mechanical precision, and their communications channels stayed clear and professional. Lieutenant Tom Bradley was flying his fighter through what looked like a maze of organic tentacles when his wingman, Danny, started losing it over the radio. "Tom, there are demons in my head." Danny's voice was cracking with panic. "They're showing me things. Cities burning, people screaming, my family being torn apart by these monsters." Tom's fighter banked hard to avoid a bioship's grasping appendage, his targeting computer already locking onto what looked like a cluster of sensory organs. "Danny, listen to me, buddy. Those aren't demons in your head. They're just really ugly aliens having a very bad day, and we're about to make it worse." His missile streaked across space and punched through bioship's hull. The explosion wasn't just physical. The psychic screaming from that particular creature cut off abruptly, like someone had unplugged a particularly annoying stereo system. "See," Tom said cheerfully as he banked for another attack run. Problem solved. What the alien commanders couldn't understand was how the humans were functioning at all. The psychic assault should have left them catatonic, curled up in fetal positions and begging for their mothers. Instead, they seemed to be treating it like a minor inconvenience. The truth was simpler than the aliens realized. Humans have been dealing with psychological warfare for thousands of years. They developed countermeasures, coping mechanisms, and a particularly human form of stubbornness that said, "I don't care how scary you are, you're still going to have a bad day." Ship psychologists worked overtime, coaching crews through mental exercises that helped them compartmentalize the terror. Combat stimulants kept people focused when their brains wanted to shut down. And underneath it all was something that no alien species quite understood. When humans got scared, they didn't run. They got mad. The real surprise came when the humans did something that made even Commander Zektar question whether they were dealing with a rational species. While the Alterians and Vorthak were trying to fight the bioships from a safe distance, human assault craft were heading straight for the organic monstrosities like guided missiles. "Admiral," Zektar's voice cracked over the communication system, "your assault teams are heading directly for those creatures. Surely you don't intend to attempt boarding actions." On the human flagship, Sergeant Lisa Chun was checking her plasma rifle with the casual efficiency of someone getting ready for a routine maintenance job. Her squad of Marines was suited up in powered armor that looked like it had been designed by people who'd given up on the concept of reasonable risk. "Sometimes, Commander," she replied as her assault craft's engines fired, "the only way to kill a monster is to get inside it and break everything that looks important." 20 minutes later, 3 bioships went dark as human boarding teams systematically fought their way through organic corridors filled with defensive organisms, located in neural control centers, and did what humans have been doing problematic things for millennia. They broke them beyond any hope of repair. The psychic screaming was getting quieter, and for the first time since the battle started, the alien crews were beginning to think they might actually survive this encounter. The humans, meanwhile, were already planning their next move. 6 months into what the galactic media was calling the Devourer Crisis, something had changed in the way other species talked about humans. It used to be casual conversation. "Oh, those humans from that little blue planet? Interesting species, but aggressive maybe, but they make decent allies." Now, when aliens mentioned humans, their voices got quieter, and they glanced around to make sure no humans were listening. The problem wasn't that humans were losing the war. The problem was how they were winning it. While the Alterian Republic focused on evacuating their border worlds, and the Vorthak Confederation worked on building better defensive shields, the human fleets had gone completely off the rails. Instead of playing defense like any reasonable species would do, they decided to solve the Devourer problem the same way humans had always solved problems that really annoyed them, by making sure those problems never bothered anyone ever again. Colonel Mike Thompson stood in the briefing room of the UES Retribution, staring at a holographic star map that would have given most navigators nightmares. The display showed jump routes through regions of space that didn't appear on any official charts because, technically, they shouldn't have been survivable. "Sir," Captain Jennifer Walsh said, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when they were about to suggest their commanding officer might be completely insane, "I've run the calculations 3 times. The probability of survival through these routes is approximately 12%. That's assuming optimal conditions, perfect navigation, and frankly, more luck than any rational person should count on." Thompson studied the routes that would take them through gravitational anomalies that could crush a ship like a tin can, past black holes that bent space-time into pretzels, and through quantum storms that could literally tear apart the molecular bonds holding matter together. It was a kind of journey that made experienced space pilots wake up in cold sweats. "Captain Walsh," he replied with a kind of smile that made smart people check their life insurance policies. "Those survival rates are for normal species flying normal ships through normal space. But we're not normal, are we?" The human fleet had evolved over the 6 months of warfare into something that defied every military tradition in the galaxy. Their ships no longer looked like the clean, efficient vessels they'd started with. Now they bristled with experimental armor that could withstand gravitational shearing, weapon systems that technically violated 3 separate galactic treaties on humane warfare, and engines that ran on principles most species hadn't discovered yet. More disturbing to the Allied commanders was that human battle plans had started reading like elaborate suicide notes written by people who were absolutely convinced they'd survive whatever impossible thing they were about to attempt. Military analysts from 12 different species had studied human tactical doctrine and concluded that it could best be described as organized insanity with a side of stubborn determination. The other species had begun keeping their distance from human operations, and not because they were afraid of the Devourers anymore. "They're not just fighting to win this war," Commander Zektar confided to his intelligence officer during one of their regular briefings. "They're fighting to make absolutely certain that nothing like this ever happens again. The humans have decided that the Devourers represent an existential threat to all life in the galaxy. And that's a problem because," his intelligence officer asked, genuinely confused. Zektar's 4 eyes all focused on his subordinate, with the kind of intensity usually reserved for explaining why jumping into black holes was generally considered a bad idea. Because when humans decide something is an existential threat, they don't form committees to study it. They don't try to negotiate with it. They don't look for compromise solutions or peaceful coexistence. They eliminate it so completely that future generations will need archaeologists to prove it ever existed. The final phase of the human plan was revealed during a joint strategy meeting that left most of the alien commanders staring at their human colleagues, like they'd just announced plans to set fire to the laws of physics. Admiral Burke stood before a holographic display, showing what human intelligence had identified as the Devourer homeworld, a nightmare realm in a region of space where reality took coffee breaks and the normal rules of existence filed for early retirement. The target is located in a dimensional fold that exists partially outside normal space-time, Burke explained with the casual tone of someone discussing weekend plans. "Our deep reconnaissance teams have confirmed that this is where the bioships are being spawned. We're going to sterilize it." The Vordak ambassador, a dignified creature who had successfully negotiated peace treaties between warring species for over a century, raised a tentacle in what humans had learned was their species' equivalent of raising a hand. "Admiral Burke," he said carefully, "surely there must be a more diplomatic solution. Perhaps we could attempt communication with these entities. Most conflict arise from misunderstandings, and with patience and proper translation protocols dash." Burke's response was delivered with the kind of patient tone that kindergarten teachers used when explaining to children why they couldn't have ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. "Ambassador, I appreciate your optimism. I really do. But these things have spent the last 6 months eating inhabited planets like appetizers at a dinner party. They've consumed 17 worlds, killed over 40 billion sentient beings, and shown absolutely zero interest in anything resembling communication. Diplomacy ended the moment they decided our worlds looked tasty." The alien commanders exchanged glances that needed no translation. They were looking at a species that had apparently decided that the concept of proportional response was more of a suggestion than a rule. The humans weren't just planning to defeat the Devourers. They were planning to erase them so thoroughly that future xenobiologists would debate whether they'd ever existed at all. "The operation launches in 72 hours, Burke continued. "We'll be using the new dimensional breach weapons, reality anchors to keep our ship stable in impossible space, and enough firepower to crack a small moon. Any questions?" Nobody had any questions. They were all too busy wondering what they'd gotten themselves into when they'd asked the humans for help. The Devourer homeworld wasn't supposed to exist. According to every law of physics that civilized species understood, The region of space where the bioships were spawning was impossible. It was a place where mathematics went to die, where the normal rules of reality had apparently decided to take an extended vacation and never bothered to come back. Admiral Burke stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Absolute Resolution, staring at sensor readings that made her navigation computers file formal complaints. The space ahead of them folded in on itself like origami made of stars and nightmares. Gravity flowed uphill, time moved in circles, and somewhere in the middle of it all was the source of every bioship that had ever terrorized a galaxy. "Ma'am," her science officer reported, his voice carrying that particular strain that came from spending too much time looking at things that shouldn't exist. "The dimensional readings are off the charts. This entire system appears to be partially phased into at least 7 different layers of reality." The thing at the center of the impossible system was what the humans had started calling the Mother, though Mother was probably too kind a word for something that looked like it had been designed by a committee of cosmic horrors with a grudge against the concept of sanity. It was vast beyond comprehension, a writhing mass of organic matter that pulsed with bioluminescent veins the size of starships. Bioships grew from its surface like tumors, breaking free to drift into normal space and begin their endless hunger. The human fleet that surrounded this abomination looked like it had been built by engineers who'd given up on the concepts of reasonable and possible somewhere around the 3rd cup of coffee. These weren't the clean, efficient warships that had left Earth 8 months ago. These were weapons platforms that existed in multiple dimensions at once, their hulls covered in reality anchors that kept them stable in impossible space, their weapon systems designed to fire things that technically weren't supposed to be able to exist. "All ships. This is Admiral Burke." Her voice carried across the fleet on communication channels that had been specially modified to work in regions where cause and effect had trust issues. "Remember, we're not just fighting for victory today. We're fighting to make sure that nothing like this ever threatens any world, anywhere, ever again." The battle that followed wasn't really a battle in any traditional sense. It was more like watching humanity apply its favorite problem-solving technique. Overwhelming force combined with stubborn refusal to acknowledge that something couldn't be done, to a cosmic horror story. Human ships moved through geometries that would have given mathematics professors nervous breakdowns. They navigated by instinct and that particularly human trait of looking at the impossible and saying, "Hold my beer, watch this." When their sensors told them they were flying through solid matter, they ignored the sensors. When physics said they should be crushed by gravitational forces that could compress stars, they politely disagreed with physics and kept flying. Captain Jennifer Walsh was piloting her destroyer through what her computer insisted was the same piece of space she'd already occupied 3 times when she spotted a cluster of bioships spawning from a mother surface. "All weapons, target the spawn pods," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fact that her navigation display was showing her position as somewhere between Tuesday and the square root of purple. Her ship's experimental reality breach weapons opened fire, sending streams of concentrated impossibility that tore through the bioships like they were made of tissue paper. The weapons didn't just destroy their targets. They deleted them from existence, so completely that the universe forgot they'd ever been there. The Mother itself took longer to die. It fought back with weapons that attacked the crew's sanity directly, showing them visions of their homeworlds being consumed, their families being torn apart, their entire species being digested by cosmic horror. Most species would have broken under that assault. Humans got irritated by it. "Ma'am," reported Sergeant Lisa Chun from her boarding craft as it burrowed into the Mother's surface like a mechanical parasite. "This thing is trying to show me scary movies in my head. Should I be worried about that?" "Negative, Sergeant," Burke replied calmly. "Just another Tuesday for us. Plant the charges and let's wrap this up." The end came not with cosmic significance or dramatic last stands, but with the kind of methodical efficiency that humans brought to problems they decided needed solving. The Mother died in a cascade of imploding dimensions, its death scream echoing through frequencies that most species couldn't hear. Bioships across the galaxy simply stopped functioning, their connection to their source severed permanently. "All units, this is Burke." The Admiral's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who just crossed the last item off a very long to-do list. "Continue sweep operations. I want every last bioship signature found and eliminated. No survivors, no stragglers, no second chances. Ma'am, Colonel Thompson's voice crackled through the communication system from his position coordinating the mop-up operations. Long-range sensors are showing all clear. No active bioship signatures detected anywhere in the galaxy. Excellent. Now let's make absolutely sure it stays that way. The next 72 hours saw a human fleet systematically hunting down every piece of Devourer technology in known space. Dead bioships were tracked down and destroyed. Worlds that had been partially consumed were swept for any remaining organic matter. Even the space where the mother had died was scrubbed clean with weapons designed to sterilize reality itself. 3 days later, the war was officially declared over. The Devourers were extinct, not just defeated, not just driven away, but completely and utterly erased from existence. Their home world had been reduced to quantum foam, their technology scattered to atoms, and their very memory would survive only in the classified files of species who wanted to remember why you didn't mess with humanity's neighbors. The victory celebration was held on the Alterian homeworld, with representatives from dozens of species praising human courage and thanking them for their sacrifice. The speeches were beautiful, the ceremonies were dignified, and the gratitude was genuine. But in the private meetings afterward, a different conversation was taking place. New security protocols were being quietly implemented. Diplomatic procedures were being updated. Trade agreements were being reviewed with an eye toward making sure humanity stayed happy with the current galactic order. The galaxy had sent out a call for help, and help had arrived. But what they'd gotten wasn't just military assistance. It was a demonstration of what happened when you threatened something that humans had decided to protect. The Devourers had learned, too late, that when humans took something personally, extinction wasn't just a possibility. It was a promise. The galaxy was safe now. The question that kept some alien leaders awake at night was whether that was entirely a good thing. Retry.